Let's talk.
Giles Brown.
Island of strangers, diversity decline, and free speech in crisis. Britain is being transformed. It is unfree, and it's getting worse as mass migration reshapes Britain's population. And increasingly, authoritarian state attempts to manage the resulting hyperdiversity by suppressing freedom of speech. We couldn't be more current if we tried. Delighted to say that Ben Jones, the director of the Free Speech Union, joins me live on the line now. Ben, good morning to you.
Hi, Giles. Good morning.
Good to have you. So for those who don't know, explain a little bit about what the Free Speech Union is.
Yes, of course. We were set up by Toby Young, now Lord Young, back in 2020. This was just ahead of the summer of George Floyd and Black Lives Matter. It was the height of the culture war over trans issues and gender-critical feminism and protecting the rights of women and girls. There were lots of free speech issues that year, and we were set up at that time as a mass membership organisation to protect people who are facing cancellation. And that's not just big names, celebrities, the J.K. Rowlings of the world. We spend 99% of our time dealing with ordinary people, dinner ladies, shop workers, teachers, council workers, people in all walks of life, everyone from army officers to chief executives to cleaners and receptionists, all sorts of people who are in trouble for something they've said. And so my job and the job of my colleagues is to help people who are being expelled from their university or who fear being sacked by their employer for something lawful that they have said. Increasingly, we're also dealing with criminal justice cases of people who are arrested or invited to attend police interviews for things they've said. That has been a huge increase in our activity since the election of Keir Starmer in 2024.
I mean, one of the things on this one is the fact that, I mean, are we saying people are being cancelled? So we're not talking about people coming out with extreme views or, views that are abhorrent to the majority of right-thinking people here. We are talking for people putting views about sort of, well, presumably this is things like the trans issues. These are people speaking out on issues that have changed because the cultural temperature has changed. I mean, how does the FSU assess what is worth looking into, especially in the cases of, as you said, not the celebrity cases, but the dinner ladies, the people who may have made a comment and it's being weaponized against them?
Well, before I took the job, I thought that I'd spend a lot of time making the principled argument for freedom of speech, defending people who had said quite unpalatable things, who should nonetheless be free to say them. That's a small percentage of what we do. But as I said, overwhelmingly, it's people who are expressing totally normal views held by the overwhelming majority of the British public, whether that's about trans rights and people saying that men cannot become women, or increasingly now issues around immigration, multiculturalism, Islam. As you said, we sadly couldn't be more topical than we are this morning. So people are in trouble for all sorts of things. We've dealt with people on both sides of the Israel-Palestine conflict. We've helped people who've expressed lawful views on both sides of that divide, for instance. There's a long list of issues. For a long time, trans has been the majority of our work. It's been women and some men as well, of course, getting in trouble for their views about that. But now it's turning. The cultural temperature, as you've said, is changing. It is about multiculturalism and the sharp edges and immigration and these issues.
It's interesting because, I mean, trans is like the touchstone, but in terms of actually how it affects most of us going around our daily business, it's a tiny percentage of people who actually are going to be bothered about bathrooms. But it seemed to be an issue that could be taken up and waved around by certain groups. Immigration, however, is going to be you are really stepping on a cultural minefield, and again, there seems to be in certain spheres of the political sort of life, it seems that yes, okay, we're virtual signalling, we're clamping down on this, and we only have to pick up this morning's newspapers to say it's been two-tier policing. People are immediately taking sides in this because in many respects, they may be wary of of being seen as either racist or cultural stereotyping, etc., etc.
Well, this appalling case of Henry Novak, it's been building. Something like this was just bound to happen. It was just bound to happen. And we know this because we did some research at the Free Speech Union, I think 3 years ago, into the training that police forces were doing on freedom of speech, if any. Overwhelmingly, British police forces are not training their officers to understand that people do have a right to freedom of speech and they do have a right to express their ideas. On the other hand, we know that they are intensively training officers to be alert for signs of racism, and that racism is a one-way phenomenon that can never be directed towards white people, but only comes from white people as a sort of unique evil. Clearly, that's total rubbish, but that is nonetheless what police forces and many other institutions are training their staff and their officers to think. And so, when you had those police officers arrive at that appalling scene, they had been trained for years, and their police forces over an extended period of time, to be alert for signs of racism and to treat that as the most acute moral evil in our society. And so they had been primed to act in the way in which they did. Now, don't get me wrong, those individual officers are culpable for what happened. But the broader institutional climate is something that politicians and senior police leaders have allowed to develop and one of which they have encouraged. My thesis in this book, it links to I take the title of the book from the speech that Keir Starmer gave, now notorious, that saying that he warned that Britain was going to become an island of strangers. My argument is actually that Britain has become an island of strangers already, and that the scale and the pace of change and the types of diversity we're now seeing mean that two-tier policing, and there's been extensive debate now about the Kirpan and rules around carrying knives in a religious context, that all of these things have created a society which is intolerably unfair. And it's a society that can only be governed by a state that becomes increasingly authoritarian. And if you look at what Nigel Farage said yesterday, talking about this cold fury, I think was his phrase, that people should feel having watched this body cam footage, he's been accused of inciting violence because of that. Now, strong societies don't need to rely on censorship. Strong societies can endure criticism of their ideas and their beliefs. Weak societies do need censorship because they will topple. This is what we're now seeing. Britain has become a weak society, and one which is increasingly brittle and authoritarian.
I mean, the saying is, I do not agree with what you say, but I will fight and die for the right to say it. And you completely do not agree with what Farage is saying. However, and it will be taken up by certain factors and used against, and saying this is a thing, and you only have to look at even though the family expressly say we do not want to see this turned into a spark that, and we have another summer of discontent because we're in that period, warm summer days, etc. So we should not be, no matter how distasteful we find this, we should not be censoring these views. It is, as you say, the mark of a strong society on either side. I suppose the main thing is that we need to be able to educate people so that they can look and take into effect. So they're not sort of triggered, and that is a word that is obviously used on both sides. They're not triggered by what appears on social media. And going back to social media, I mean, we need to be investing in a police force that doesn't look at people. It goes for soft targets, i.e., people saying something on Twitter or social media that has very little effect. And yet, the cases that really upset people, like a young man losing his life, like the perceived County Lines gang, we've seen it again and again, and that is also that is building to the cold hard fury that Farage alludes to.
We had a shocking case last year of an American woman. She was going through cancer treatment. Sadly, she has died since. And the police knocked on her door, and she had the presence of mind to start recording the interaction. And the police officer came round. She had lost her hair from chemotherapy. She was obviously visibly a very unwell elderly woman. nonetheless, she started this recording. And this policeman had come round because something she had said on Facebook had, in his words, offended somebody. There was no suggestion that she committed a crime or that she might have committed a crime that needed investigating. He had come round because he'd been instructed by his supervisor, we've had a complaint, therefore you need to go and speak to this woman because she said something on Facebook. And then this officer persisted in this conversation, having knocked on her door, realising that he was dealing with a very unwell elderly woman in tragically advanced stages of cancer treatment. And again, that officer had been primed by years of training to think that that was a reasonable thing to do. And so I'm afraid British policing is increasingly rotten. And I don't think that police officers, particularly those who have some years of experience, actually want to be doing this. I would be very surprised if police officers would say, yes, that should be the priority, dealing with offensive things that people have said on Facebook. And I would have thought that, again, most police officers, I hope, would have seen the body cam footage of the Henry Novak killing, those truly awful moments where he's clearly dying, and that they would be as appalled as any ordinary member of the public would be. And yet our society has been reconfigured with this really bizarre set of priorities where diversity is the ultimate goal and objective of every single institution. So the police are much less interested in justice and with stopping and solving crimes. They're much more fired up by racism from white people. And so it's this really distorted, it's like this sort of super objective that has overridden every institution from universities to private businesses to the police. It's bizarre.
I mean, if you remember Dominic Cummings, Boris Johnson's spad, he was saying, he famously said to the media, get out of metropolitan London, go to the country. So what's going on? Is this obsession perhaps purely something that circles around the London and the media? The media can be a bleeding sounding box, talking to each other. Same with politics, Same with everything. Is this something you saw? Because the book is called obviously Island of Strangers. Is this something that you see being replicated across the UK, in Scotland, in Wales, in the north? Or do you think it's a purely sort of metropolitan thing that maybe has a few outlining, but the majority of the UK still believes in these core values that is Britishness, quote unquote?
The strange thing is, Wales and Scotland are much more woke than England is. London obviously being an outlier on its own. What we see at the FSU in our data, it tends to be elite institutions, so top Russell Group universities, Oxford, Cambridge, Durham, York, Exeter, and so on, and elite public schools, which tend to have the most cases in our files. And we've dealt with 6,000 individual cases now in the last 6 years, so we have a pretty big data set to draw upon. So there is this cultural faddishness, and there is a part of the middle and upper middle class who are very excited by woke ideas. My argument in this book goes deeper than that. I think that because Britain has become an island of strangers, actually what we're seeing is the propulsive logic of managing a society that is divided and fragmented, which does have lots of different rival belief groups who are all trying to impose their ideas or carve special exemptions for themselves away from the rest of society. And so I think woke, it comes from North America originally. It's very popular among this very small set of culturally influential people. It's never popular at a mass level at all. But I think the legacy of it has been to leave society even more divided, and probably it's made it impossible to unify society because everything now has become about race, and there is not a common sense of us all being in it together anymore. Of course, the FSU is going to be labelled by various factions as propelling that, of being, if you like, anti-woke or I mean that must be an interesting situation to find yourself as somebody who's pushing free speech to then almost be in danger of being cancelled yourself or viewed through a particular lens. Well, I think cultural wars over freedom of speech over the last, say, 70 or 80 years have oscillated. If you go back to the 1950s, censorship is much more likely to be driven by the cultural right in Britain or in the United States, for example, in the era of McCarthyism. Nowadays, undoubtedly, in my view, it's driven by the cultural left, or elements of the left, the woke, progressive left. All of that said, I would be delighted to help somebody who came to us and said, I'm a trans rights activist and I've been cancelled for my pro-trans views. We would be absolutely committed to taking that case on. In fact, we'd be very keen to identify such a person and to help them. As yet, there are no examples of that because the the commanding heights of the cultural economy are commanded by the woke.
What are you hoping that people will learn or contemplate or look at having read Island of Strangers?
My message, I'm afraid, is a difficult one. It's also one that I hope I'm wrong about. I hope I look back in 10 years and think that this was too pessimistic. The book for me is a starting point. It's an explanation of how things have gone so badly wrong in the United Kingdom, of how there are trade-offs between diversity and multiculturalism and a liberal tradition of free speech. It is a warning to people. It is also, I hope, the starting point of a restoration of that liberal tradition of freedom of speech. And I hope that that's possible. But we are in a very bad position right now. People are getting very angry. People feel increasingly that voting or talking, not only they stop from talking, but that talking doesn't actually accomplish anything. And I think that there is a rising level of anger. And I thought that before the scenes last night in Southampton of those riots. I think we are in a very bad position.
The book is called Island of Strangers, Diversity Decline and the Free Speech Crisis. It's by Ben Jones. Listeners, you can go onto the TRE virtual bookstore, click on the front cover, and it'll be winging its way to you. Ben, if people want to find you, presumably directed them to the FSU, where can people find the Free Speech Union?
Yeah. The Free Speech Union website, and you can find me on X at Ben Barry Jones. Please do get in touch if you ever need our help with something.
The book is called Island of Strangers. It's by Ben Barry Jones. Ben, thank you so much for your time today.
Great. Thanks for having me.